Oh, you read notes?
I'm reading.
Oh, okay, good.
I must. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the Gene Rimsky Theater for this very special evening. My name is Amanda Kowalczyk, and I'm the Manager of Community Affairs here at Landmark on Main Street. We're very excited to bring you tonight's program, Rise Above Hate, Fighting Antisemitism Together. Before we get to the program, there are a few people I'd like to thank. First, I'll start with Scott Reich, Laura Silver-McGuire, and Tracy Whitlock, who brought this idea to us, put together the amazing panel that you are about to meet, and worked with us here at Landmark to make this night happen. I'm sure that many of you in the audience tonight have been to one of our musical performances here at the Landmark, but if this is your first conversation from Main Street, I'd like to tell you briefly what this program is all about. This series aims to bring to light important issues facing not only our town, but the country and the world beyond. So it seemed very fitting that we'd hold this timely discussion in this room this evening. None of this would be possible without the generous support of the Angela and Scott Jagger Foundation. Angela is here with us tonight, and I'd like to acknowledge her with, again, another big round of applause. As always, Angela, we are very grateful for your support. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Congresswoman Marianne Del Monte for her involvement in tonight's event. In addition, I would like to thank New York State Assemblywoman Gina Saliti for being here. And I would also like to thank the Town of North Hempstead Supervisor Jen DeSena for her presence as well. We are here tonight to have a productive, meaningful, and thought-provoking discussion. There will be a panel presentation and also time for audience interaction. We are here to cultivate an environment of mutual respect and understanding. We want this to be a safe place to have these types of discussions. And to that end, this is a gentle reminder that hate speech or aggression of any kind will not be tolerated. Please also do silence your cell phones now. Thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight. I am very proud of this event, and it is my wish that we can all walk away from this evening feeling empowered, heard, and inspired. Now, I would like to introduce to you Laura and Tracy. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight for what we hope will be an informative and meaningful evening. Just over a year ago, Tracy Whitlock, Scott Reich, and I, three strangers at the time, connected over our shared concern of the uptick of anti-Semitism in our community. Tragically, the horrific attacks of October 7th, 2023, perpetuated by the terrorist group Hamas against the people of Israel, further unleashed an even greater wave of anti-Semitism that has been reverberating around the world ever since, and this reality has affected us deeply here in Port Washington. Together, Tracy, Scott, and I sought to take action, first by meeting by ourselves. And so we began meeting, first by ourselves, and then with various religious leaders, government officials, and community leaders to explore how we could work together and play a part in trying to stop this hate. We want to acknowledge the great allyship of several non-Jewish members of our community who who joined in these discussions and helped create this evening's program. First, Councilwoman Marianne Del Monte has been a tireless advocate for our work and helped facilitate the presence of our inspirational keynote speaker. Thank you, Marianne. In addition, Sister Kathy Somerville, Sister Kathy, Kalpana Bandarkar, Nicole Aselta, Brandon Kurse, and not here tonight, but Michael Kavunis, have all made meaningful contributions of their time and ideas in support of this effort, and we thank them for their courage, compassion, and kindness.
Our program begins with a keynote speech from Natalie Sanandaji, a 28-year-old Long Island native born to an Israeli mother and Iranian father. Natalie was in Israel on October 7th at the Nova Music Festival. After narrowly surviving the massacre, Natalie changed her focus in life to be an advocate for the Jewish people and fight anti-Semitism. We would like to thank the Landmark for their partnership and especially recognize Amanda Kowalczyk for all of her behind-the-scenes hard work in making tonight happen. We truly could not do it without you. And with that, we are so fortunate to have Natalie here with us tonight. Please join us in welcoming her.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Thank you all for being here today. I want to start off really, truly thanking all of you from the bottom of my heart. As a survivor of October 7th, we just reached a little bit past the 1-year mark. Actually, yesterday, according to the Jewish calendar, was the 1-year mark of the attacks. And I continue sharing my story as much as possible, but I always say, if there's no one sitting out in the audience to listen to my story, then, what's the use? So truly, it means so much to me. It means so much to all the survivors anytime people take the time out of their personal time, out of their day or night to come here and speak. So really thank you to all of you. My name is Natalie Sanandaji. I am actually a Long Island native, born and raised in New York in Great Neck. And as the daughter of an Israeli mother, I've been going to Israel almost every year my entire life, and this past summer was no different. I went to Israel for a friend's wedding, and I ended up staying for the holidays to be with friends and family, and found myself at the Nova Festival. You can go to the next slide. So me and my friends arrived at the Nova Festival at around 1 a.m. And typically with festivals like these, they go anywhere from 24 hours to 2 days, 3 days. And on the festival grounds, there's usually an area that's called the campsite area, which is near the dance floor. And everyone brings camping gear. They bring chairs and tents and sleeping bags and blankets. And you kind of set up your cozy little campsite near the festival itself. And then you go to enjoy the music and start dancing. So me and my friends arrived, and as soon as we arrived, they had a group of friends that were already there. They set up the campsite. We dropped off our bags, and we went to dance for a few hours. At around 3:30, my friends decided that they were tired, and they wanted to go back to the campsite, rest for a few hours, and wake up for the sunrise set of the festival, which is typically supposed to be the most exciting part. Everyone's dancing throughout the night, and you're kind of waiting for that moment when the sun comes up and everything is at its most beautiful and euphoric. So we went to sleep, and instead of waking up to the sound of the sunrise set music, we woke up to the sound of rockets. And when I first started telling my story, something that was very important for me to emphasize to the international audiences, mostly the American audiences I was speaking in front of, was the way we were woken up. So we were sleeping on camping chairs, and one of our friends who was awake when the first rockets were intercepted, she was on the dance floor, and she wanted to come over, and she knew that we were asleep. She wanted to come over and make sure that we had woken up and that we were alert to the situation. So she came over to us and she was smiling and she was very calm and she kind of nudged us awake and she was like, Boker Tov, guys, which in Hebrew is good morning. And she was like, I just wanted you guys to know a few rockets had been intercepted overhead, but it's fine. You know, it's normal for the area that we're in. We know that we're near Gaza, and it's a holiday, and we all know that typically they tend to do this on holidays. It'll probably just be a few rockets. It's going to pass. The party's going to continue. Nothing to really worry too much about. I just wanted you guys to be awake. And I try to explain to people, you know, imagine a music festival happening anywhere else in the world. Let's say Coachella in California. Imagine if suddenly rockets were intercepted over people's heads as they were dancing. There's no way they would react in such a calm manner. But unfortunately for Israelis, this is their reality. This is something they go through on a semi-regular basis. And one of the major questions I got asked when I first started interviewing was, why didn't you start running right away? And I tried to explain to people that for Israelis, if they were to stop everything that they were doing, every time a few rockets were intercepted over their heads, they wouldn't get anything done. So to them, they truly believed that this would pass and that the party would continue and that everything would be fine. And even though I had been to Israel almost every year my entire life, it just so happens I had never been to Israel at a time of war. So this was my first time experiencing rockets. But I looked to my Israeli friends and I saw that they were calm and I chose to stay as calm as possible. But as soon as I woke up, I got up and I started counting the rockets. And I looked up at the sky and first it was 5, and then it was 10, and then it was 15, then it was 20. And I think somewhere between 15 and 20 is when people started to get a little bit nervous. And around that time is when the festival security had shut off the music completely and started to announce on the loudspeakers for everyone to please start gathering their things and going out to their cars and heading out. So we gathered our things and we go to our cars, and even on the way to the cars, we still weren't that nervous. We figured, you know, we have the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome typically intercepts all, if not most, of the rockets. And our biggest fear was probably, one, maybe the scraps from the intercepted rockets hitting our cars as we're driving out, and 2, being stuck in traffic. So on the way to the car, I asked my friends if they thought it was okay if I would use the bathroom before we head out. They were like, yes, it's fine, no rush, we're gonna be stuck in traffic anyway, we'll wait for you by the car. So I head to the bathrooms, I head back to the car, and not until about 2 weeks later did I realize how much I was putting my life at risk just by going to those bathrooms. Because around that time is when a video surfaced that I'm sure maybe some of you, if not most of you, have seen, of the Hamas terrorists coming to these yellow porta potties and shooting at every stall, trying to kill anyone who was inside. So I was there maybe 15, 20 minutes before, according to the timestamps. But I made it out. I went back to the car and we started to drive out. And for anyone who hasn't seen photos from the festival grounds, the road that we were trying to drive out on was a pretty narrow dirt road. It was 2 lanes. And if you can imagine, this festival is about a little over 3,000 people, all for the most part trying to leave around the same time in hundreds of cars. And we're trying to make our way out. As we expected, there was traffic. It was bumper to bumper. People were moving very slowly. And then suddenly the festival security, who was on either side of the dirt road trying to guide everyone to safety, started frantically yelling at all of us to pull our cars over to the side of the road and get out of our cars and start running. And at this point, we couldn't understand why they would tell us to run from rockets. That didn't make much sense to us, but we figured, you know, they have our best interests at heart. There's probably something that they know that we don't know, so we should listen to them. And we pulled our car over. And me and my 3 friends that I came with, we were sitting in the car for a few moments and we're kind of just staring at each other confused, trying to understand why they would tell us to leave our car behind and start running. And that's when we heard the first gunshots. And as soon as we heard the first gunshots, we opened our doors and we started running, and everyone in the cars around us opened their doors and started to run. And people were running in every direction. Nobody understood what direction was the direction of safety. And actually over here, so there were a lot of people who took photos and videos, even as they were running, which I didn't do. I couldn't focus on doing both. I'm not much of a multitasker, so I was focusing more on getting out. And the few times I took photos or videos were those moments in between the gunshots. Anytime we didn't hear gunshots for a few minutes, we would kind of slow down to catch our breath. And this was one of the first photos I took. Oh, if you go back, those two are the first photos I took, and you can kind of see some cars that people left behind and some people walking. That was at around, I think, 7:30. And a lot of people asked me, how did you know what direction to run to? How did you know what direction was the direction of safety? And the answer is that nobody knew. Nobody knew what direction was safer to run to. Nobody knew what direction might have a terrorist waiting for you in that direction. And if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see that everything for the most part was open fields. There wasn't really much places to hide. And when I first started interviewing, I had a very hard time answering that question. How did I know what direction to run to? And maybe, I think 2 months into the war, I spoke at a vigil in Columbus Circle. And a man came up to me and he said that he had seen many of my interviews and he saw that I was having such a hard time answering this question. And he told me that he had interviewed many Holocaust survivors in his life. And that when Holocaust survivors were asked in life and death situations how they knew what decisions to make to save their life, they coined a term called a choiceless choice. And basically the meaning of a choiceless choice was that in these life and death situations, you didn't have much time to really analyze every decision you had, like every choice you had, whether it was turning left or right, or choosing to hide or to continue to run. But you simply had to make a choice in that moment. And that perfectly described every decision we made while running from the Hamas terrorists. They were all choiceless choices. And an example of one of those choiceless choices was about, I would say maybe 2.5, 3 hours into running, we passed by a group of friends from our campsite, and they were hiding in a ditch. So as you can see, there wasn't many trees to hide behind, but they found a giant hole in the ground, and they all decided to hide in this ditch. There was maybe 10 or 15 of them. And we passed by them, and they saw us, and they called us over, and they told us, guys, come here, come hide in this ditch with us. And three out of the 4 of us that I came with, we started crawling into this ditch. And one of my friends that I came with, he was standing above the ditch and he was looking down at us. And he started yelling at us. And he told us, this is a horrible idea. If we hide in this ditch and the Hamas terrorists find us, we're going to be sitting ducks. They're just going to shoot us right on the spot and we'll have no chance at survival. He said our only option for survival is to continue running. So he yelled at us and told us to get out of the ditch, and we listened to him. We got out and we continued to run. And unfortunately, for the friends that we left behind, we found out about a day or 2 later that none of them had made it out of the ditch alive. If you go to the next slide. Oh. So in there you can kind of just hear, the sound of the rockets that were being sent over us constantly as we were running. And if you go to the next slide. So about, I would say, I think half an hour after that, we continue running and we passed by a police officer. And that was the first time we had seen anyone from the police force. At this point, we still hadn't seen any soldiers. And we came up to him and we asked him, where is everybody? Why are we alone? And he said he didn't have much answers for us. Everyone from his unit had already been killed and he was the only one who survived. And he said the most I can do was walk alongside you guys and try to protect you to the best of my ability. And we asked him, we saw that he had his walkie-talkie on him, and we asked him, well, can you call for backup? And he said no, because the Hamas terrorists had taken over the local police station and the police radio station, and that if he were to try to call for backup, he would give up our location to them. So he continued walking with us, and as he was walking, we could hear the Hamas terrorists yelling in Arabic from his walkie-talkie, and we really understood the severity of the situation, that there was no way to call for backup. And eventually we got to this kind of main paved road, and there were hundreds of other people from the festival walking on this road. And we asked him if he thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. Should we start walking alongside all these people, or if this would make us an easy target? And he said that it was a good idea and that we should continue walking. As you can see from the photo, we were walking in the direction of the sun. And he said to continue walking along this road in the direction of the sun, because in that direction is a town called Patish. And it was the nearest town to get to safety that the Hamas terrorists had not infiltrated yet. So we continue walking down this road, and at this point we've been walking for hours. And eventually, about 4 hours into walking, we saw a small tree. And there were maybe 10 other people sitting under this tree, and we hadn't heard gunshots in a few minutes, and we decided it was a good time to sit under the shade of the tree, get some shade from the sun, and kind of catch our breath and try to understand what's happening. You know, at this point, we've been running for 4 hours. 4 hours ago, we were dancing at a music festival, and suddenly we're being hunted by terrorists, and it was very confusing. So we're sitting under this tree, and we're talking to these other people who are sitting there with us, and suddenly we see a pickup truck that seemed to have come out of nowhere, driving towards us. And for all of us, our automatic reaction was that these were terrorists coming to kill us. Most of the people at the festival, they were getting videos and photos constantly sent to their phones from other parts of the festival grounds, and people saw that most of the terrorists were driving these kind of pickup trucks. And when we saw the pickup truck, we all kind of simultaneously like half got up and contemplated running, and then we all automatically realized we had nowhere to run to. You know, if this was a terrorist, they're in a truck, they have guns, we're on foot, we have nothing to protect ourselves with, and we all kind of just sat back down. And it was an oddly peaceful moment. And we all kind of just smiled and nodded at each other as if to say, you know, it was nice knowing you, and kind of accepting our fate. But as the truck got closer, we saw that there was a girl in the front seat, and she had a festival wristband on, and she was waving it out the window, kind of to signal to us that she's one of us and that this is someone coming to save us. So you could see in that photo, it's kind of just a photo I took of all of us sitting in the back of this man's pickup truck. And at the time that I took the photo, I couldn't believe that I was being saved. I couldn't believe that maybe I was going to make it out of this alive. And as soon as this man dropped us off in his hometown of Patish, which is the town that we were trying to get to, he turned right back around to go save more lives. And because of that, I didn't get his name. It took me about 3 months to track him down and get his name. You can go to the next slide. So I'll tell you more about him in a little bit. But about 4 days after the attacks, I started interviewing. And I started speaking out. I went to DC to speak to senators, to tell them my story. And my goal from speaking out was to put a face to the statistics that people were hearing on the news. Because when you just hear numbers, you know, this many people were killed, it's very easy to kind of dehumanize a whole group of people or say that they deserved it, which is what started happening very soon after. And my hope was that if I interview and if I speak to people face to face, and if they see me, that maybe they'll think to themselves, you know, this could have been my sister or my daughter or my friend. You could go to the next slide. And I right away also started doing interviews for articles. And in the beginning, when I first started interviewing, you know, for either news stations, on TV, for the most part, people wanted to only speak about October 7th. And then in one article, somebody quoted me saying something that to me was not crazy at all, but to her was so outlandish that she made it the title of the article. And what I said was that as a Jew, right now, I feel safer in Israel, even at a time of war, than I do here in the United States. And since that statement, that's all anyone wanted to talk about in interviews. They would give me maybe 2 minutes to talk about October 7th, and then they wanted to ask me about this statement. And I was happy that they wanted to ask about it, because I wanted to explain to the world why that wasn't an outlandish statement. I wanted to explain to the world why I didn't feel safe. You could go to the next slide. And that's just some more of my interviews. But basically, I want to explain to people, especially as someone who grew up here in Long Island, I always felt very privileged. I always felt that I was very lucky to grow up in an area where I didn't have to hide who I was. The first time I ever actually experienced anti-Semitism was visiting family friends in France. And I was on the train, and my family friend told me to hide my necklace under my shirt. And then we were out walking in Paris, and I saw these boys do a hand gesture, and I asked her what that hand gesture meant. And she said, "I'll tell you later." And she told me that it was called a canal, and basically it's kind of the opposite of doing Heil Hitler, but with the same meaning. And I remember coming back home to Long Island, I remember thinking to myself, that it's so sad that my family friends have these two identities of being French and being Jewish, but that their identities can't coincide, and that they have to kind of hide who they are. And then I remember coming back after October 7th and suddenly feeling the way my family friends felt in France, and suddenly feeling like I came back to a different New York than I left behind before October 7th. And it's not an easy feeling, because obviously when you tell people, you feel safer in Israel even at a time of war than you do here in the United States, that's a confusing thing to hear, because obviously there's so much danger of war in Israel, but the meaning of that statement is that on a day-to-day basis, I feel like I'm nervous to speak Hebrew out in public, or I'm nervous for people to know that I was at the Nova Festival, because I'm nervous that they might either verbally or physically attack me. You can go to the next slide. Right away, I also started going back to Israel. About a month after the attacks in November, I started working for the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. And at first, my advocacy was more so just doing news interviews, but then it fully became my career. And I started going back as part of my work, and that's kind of what Israel looked like in the beginning of the war. You can go to the next slide. And here you can see this was my first time going back to the Nova site since the attacks. And on that day, I got to meet the man who saved my life. As I mentioned, I would go back to speak about him. So it took me about 3 months to hunt him down and find his name, because as soon as he dropped us off, he turned right back around to save more lives. You can go to the next slide. And that's him. His name is Moshe Sati. And I got to speak with him, and I found out that on that day, him and his son drove back and forth from their hometown to the festival grounds for about 8 or 10 hours, and they saved about 300 to 400 lives that day. So he definitely deserves that round of applause, and he's such a humble person that he did one interview with me, and since then, he wouldn't do any other interviews. He said, "I didn't do what I did for the recognition, I did it because that's who I am." And it took him much longer to be able to go back to the festival grounds than it took me. It took him about 6 months to gain the strength to go back. Because unlike me, I ran away from the grounds right away, and I didn't see all the horror that he saw. He went back and forth for 8 or 10 hours. He saw the death, he saw the blood, he saw the rape, and it was very hard for him to go back. And I remember on the day that he went back, he sent me a message, and he was very sad. And now you saw in the previous photo what the festival grounds look like is it's a memorial for all the lives that were lost. And there's photos of everyone that was killed that day. And he went back and he sent me a voice note, and he said, "Natalie, it's so hard for me to be here and to see all these photos." And I said to him, as hard as it is to see all those photos, just remember how many photos aren't there because you saved their lives. So he's really just an incredible person. And you can go to the next slide. So that's at the festival grounds again. You could go to the next one. So since October 7th, through my work, I have really had the opportunity, I think, to understand something that a lot of other survivors don't get to understand. through the Combat Antisemitism movement, which is the organization I work for, we work mostly, almost solely through interfaith relations. So we work mostly with Christian leaders and Muslim leaders around the world. And we've brought many of them, those who were willing to come, to Israel and to the festival grounds, such as Mike Pompeo and his wife, who were really incredible. You can go to the next slide. So through my work, I get to understand something that unfortunately a lot of other survivors don't understand, and that is that we actually have much more allies in this world than we do people who are against us. It's just that those who are against us tend to be louder, so they seem greater in number. But I consider myself very lucky that I get to meet people almost on a weekly basis, and I get to truly understand and take that in, that we really do have so many allies. You can go to the next slide. And that's just, some of my more speaking engagements. But like I said in the beginning, it means so much to see how many people still care, even a year later, to come and to hear me speak and to hear my story. Because truly, I can do this as much as I want, but if there's not people to listen to it, it doesn't have as much of an effect. So I just want to say thank you to you guys again for being here and for listening to me. And yeah, that's it. And I'm going to pass the mic over to you, and we will have a Q&A after for anyone who wants to ask me any questions.
Thank you, Natalie. I would like to introduce our moderator, Scott Reich, and our panelists. Our panelists include Natalie, Rabbi Jody Siff of the Reconstructionist Synagogue, Kalpana Bendarkar, a nonprofit leader who is co-chair of the organization Erase Racism, and Dr. Michael Hines, superintendent of the Port Washington School District. After the panel discussion, we will open up dialogue to the audience for questions and answers.
Can you hear me okay? First of all, Natalie, thank you. Thank you for being here, for your courage, for sharing your story. Two things that I just want to react to very briefly. One is there are a lot of people who really care, a lot of people, okay? And you have a lot of people here. We're live streaming this to a lot of people, and that should never be lost because there is an endless reservoir of support for people who have suffered the way you and others have, and so just be aware of that. The second is that you talked about allyship, and I want to pause and recognize people who, we don't need to do a show of hands or anything, but if you are here and you are not Jewish, I want to say thank you and acknowledge that you're here because allyship is the key to everything, so thank you very much. So as you heard, we're going to engage in a panel discussion now, and after that, we will open it up for audience questions. So if you do have a question, you'll just be invited to raise your hand, and we will make sure we get a mic to you. In terms of the program of this panel discussion, we're going to break it into three different parts. The first is grounding us in what anti-Semitism is and how it manifests. The second will be discussing the impact of anti-Semitism in our community, what's happening, how are our community leaders working to address these issues, and third, we'll have some reflections and where we go from here. Rabbi Jody, I'd love to start with you, please. You've lived in our community for over 2 decades, and you're a rabbi, as folks heard, of Reconstructionist Synagogue of the North Shore. Can you please help us define what anti-Semitism is and how you have seen over the time you've lived in our community anti-Semitism manifest in Port Washington?
So I want to thank Landmark and Amanda and Tracy and Laura and you, Scott, and Natalie for being continually brave enough to tell your story. And I'm thrilled to be on the panel here. With being in this community is truly a blessing. So I think that the key piece with defining anti-Semitism is thinking about what we can't ignore first, which is the fact that we're holding in this moment hostages still in captivity, and lives lost, and families shattered. And the rise of anti-Semitism happening, and all of that happening at the same time, and it bringing up intense feelings of fear. So I could give you the specific definitions of anti-Semitism that people look towards, which one is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, which includes rhetoric and discrimination and physical acts that are directed at Jews and Jewish property and Jewish institutions. And this definition specifically notes that the criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic when it crosses into delegitimization and demonization, or applying double standards to Israel in reference to other countries. But there is also another definition of anti-Semitism that people have also leaned towards, which is the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism, which really is an alternative because it tries to distinguish the fact that criticism of Israel or Zionism that is similar to criticism of other nations is not inherently anti-Semitic unless it intentionally invokes anti-Semitic tropes or seeks to harm Jews for being Jewish. So those are two clear different delineations of how people define anti-Semitism. When we think about what this definition highlights and the concept of the hostility that it invokes in people, it brings up what you asked, like, how have I seen this evolve over the course of these past generations? So when I came here to Port Washington, I had one child. I subsequently just now graduated my fourth child through Schreiber, and my last one is in college, and it changed over the course of time. But how it changed, I would say I saw the most change since the 2016 election. And but what was the change? It wasn't systemic or systematic anti-Semitism that I saw. It was isolated incidents that have been addressed in various degrees. So we saw specific situations of vandalism, of hate speech, and we saw this popping up in Port Washington, and it was mirror imaging what was happening across our country. So it was in a more limited fashion, but we were seeing it. And I want to say again that it was not felt at the time to be systemic or systematic, but it was felt. And you want me to wait to go into the whole how the relationships developed after that? Am I
We'll
correct?
get to that
Okay.
in a moment.
Okay.
Thank you for that introductory set of remarks. Dr. Hines, I'm going to turn to you, please. And this is a nice segue because you've spent a career, obviously, as an educator, and especially in the wake of October 7th, but before that, too, you've become, by sort of having to become more well-versed in these types of issues. Could you please comment on what you believe to be the responsibilities of a school district in combating anti-Semitism?
Before I do, I want to thank, again, everyone for being here, and certainly the Landmark for hosting this. I'm rarely nervous speaking in front of people. This is so important. I'm nervous for the right reasons because I really, really do care. And one of the biggest concerns I always have is saying or doing the wrong thing to upset our community, and certainly outside our community, because when things happen within a school, especially post October 7th, we have to be very mindful of whatever messaging goes out there, how it impacts our Jewish friends, and quite frankly, our non-Jewish friends. So with that said, there is no book. You can go to Borders, right, and go, how do I handle this situation? What I have relied on is our rabbis within the community who have become very near and dear to me, I have to say. The second thing is, and I can't overstate the importance of this. Rabbi Jody was kind enough to allow me to visit when the October 7th raw footage was shown in Nassau County to a select few people. Some of you are here in this audience who got to see it. And it hasn't left my mind. And I share that with you because as Rabbi Jody and I were leaving, I told her, I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be able to erase this from my mind. And she said, do not erase this from your mind. So going back to the question of what's our responsibility, when something happens within a school, we have to ensure that whatever party is infected, whatever family is impacted by whatever symbol of hate is shown, that we have to be very clear with our messaging. We have to call it for what it is and not conflate it with other things that are taking place, to make sure that we have those connections with the families, and quite frankly, to make sure that every incident that happens within a school, that we have the police involved, we have process and protocols in place that we follow. If there's something I don't know what to do, I lean on my friends to point me in the right direction. And, you know, again, before I came to Port Washington 5 years ago, this was something I really didn't have to contend with, quite frankly. So my Board of Education has been very supportive as far as what we're trying to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. We have amazing administrators who work diligently to investigate when something happens. And the last thing I'll end with is that we've expanded our palette as far as what we offer from an educational standpoint with all of our students. You know, we see these things take place in the middle school or the high school, but it's our responsibility to make sure that we begin earlier in 4th grade, in 5th grade, to make sure it's developmentally appropriate so students understand. And we've made a concerted point and mission to do that, which I can talk about later.
Thank you. So Kalpana, we're going to come to you, and Dr. Hines, you made a comment earlier in your remarks about the impact not only on the Jewish community, but on the non-Jewish community as well. And Kalpana, I would love to invite you, please, to comment on the fact that you are not Jewish, you have Jewish friends, you live in this community. How have recent events around the rise in anti-Semitism impacted you and your family and how you live?
Thanks, Scott. I also appreciate being here and being part of this discussion. It's very painful to hear that my friends don't feel comfortable sending, that their kids don't feel safe at school or walking around in their identity. And it's a painful thing to hear. And so I see as my responsibility to show up. And, I want my kids to feel safe at school and in community, and I want everyone's kids to feel safe. So I do look at this and my participation in kind of 3 domains: individual, family, and community. And so individual, for me, I want to educate myself, and so I do a lot of reading. I want to reflect, and it's about, for me, checking in with my friends connected to the region after October 7th, and regularly checking in. Not just the day after, 2 days after, but regularly staying connected and checking in with them. And that's a big part of my journey. And individually also thinking about my privilege walking around in the world and how that affects my life and others. And then in the family, it's very important that we cultivate with our kids a culture of conversation and a culture of curiosity. It's extremely important in how we keep the conversation open with our kids, We don't pretend to have all the answers. We check in with them on what's going on in school and what information they're getting, but also what's happening at recess, in the cafeteria. And then also in the community, it's really supporting organizations that are working to end anti-Semitism, advocating for change, reaching out to the school proactively to understand what's going on, but also reaching out in response to things that have happened. I think that's a responsibility. And again, showing up. I think that's just a big part, showing up to events like this, showing up for our friends. It's a big, I see it as a responsibility as being an ally.
Thank you. Natalie, we're going to bring it back to you. Would love to connect the globalized perspective that you eloquently submitted a few moments ago with the local components. So, for example, when we see a global uptick in anti-Semitism, it translates in different ways to local communities. Could you please comment on sort of what the big picture, how the big picture manifests in localized, smaller ways from your experience?
Well, I guess it also depends on what age group we're talking about. Because let's say, for example, recently I did a video with Zach Sage Fox, who is a big Jewish kind of influencer advocate. And we walked around Washington Square Park, and we asked people mostly of college age range what they thought about October 7th, what they thought about the conflict, and so on and so forth. And what I realized from most of the answers, if we're talking about that age range, because I think that's what I know most about, is a lot of the hate comes from lack of knowledge. Anytime someone had a very strong opinion about the subject, the goal of the video was not to attack them. We would ask them why they had that opinion. And then the answer was always, for almost every single person we spoke to, oh, I don't have enough knowledge about the subject to give you an answer as to why I feel this way. And what I realized is that a lot of people are getting their information and their education from very short TikTok videos that kind of just give them little snippets of the bigger picture. So then people think they understand something, people think that they have a correct opinion about something, but they don't have any actual information to back it up with. And I think for me, I don't want to say anything to insult anyone, but I think for me, I think it comes from a lack of education of the Jews in general throughout not just world history, but also American history. I think if people had more education on the subject, there wouldn't be as much hate. I think most anti-Semitism roots in the lack of knowledge.
It's a great point, and we'll come in a moment to how we can try to connect challenges with opportunities. I'm struck, we're in the midst, obviously, of the World Series here, and I'm thinking a little bit about the idea that a farm system is what we're talking about. It's training up the next generation to get the right level of information, education, and, Kalpana, to borrow something you said a moment ago, the right level of curiosity, right? One of the things that we talk a lot about conceptually is this idea that the other, right, is the otherness is something that is unwelcome at times in America and certainly in local communities and more broadly, and we have opportunities to try to correct that. I do want to connect this locally with some statistics that I think are troubling, that I'm sure are familiar to many people here. According to the Anti-Defamation League, there were over 8,800 anti-Semitic incidents in 2023, including assaults, harassment, and vandalism, which was a 140% increase over the prior year. On a local level, in Suffolk County, last year the number of reported hate incidents against Jews doubled over the prior year. And in Nassau here, the uptick was around just shy of 30%. And these are, of course, only the reported incidents. Locally, we have seen swastikas painted on school property. We have seen disturbing photos of Nazi salutes, gas masks, and a number of other incidents, often not even publicly recognized, but which are spoken about among community members. Rabbi Jody, I would love to come back to you, because when you and I were speaking in advance of this discussion, you shared some insights with me that I was not familiar with. And for example, a lot of the efforts that are taking place among the pillars of the community, government, clergy, the school district, police department, a lot of those efforts are not publicized, and some of those for obvious reasons. For what you can share, can you comment on how you have worked with other community leaders to try to address these issues? What's going on in the town to try to combat this big problem?
So we have partners. We have civic partners, we have interfaith clergy partners, we have Jewish community partners, and we have school partners. We really are blessed and lucky about that. Our first is our Jewish community works collaboratively. We do things together, whether it is since October 7th, we have rotated synagogues and gone to each synagogue to be able to be in larger Jewish community to support each other. We are part of signature synagogues through ADL, where we each pay into the program so that we can work collaboratively. And you're going to talk about a program that we're doing on November 17th for our upcoming, our high school kids looking towards college. We do work about No Place for Hate in our school district. We are part of a village which supports 55 and older members who work collaboratively to do things. We've done Pride Shabbat, Yom HaShoah. An organization before you guys came to be was Shamor, which was the idea of trying to support our civic and school systems to be able, in times of crisis, when something happens in the Jewish community, that we are here as a support. And our Interfaith Clergy Association is unbelievable. Kathy is representing them, and we have had all of them stand with and stand by us, whether it's Jackie Lynch at the AME Church, John Lardis at the Greek Orthodox Church. We stand together in times of crisis and in times of joy. And that is the key piece, is continually standing together in each of these times. And so we meet, Rabbi Michael Mishkin, who is here, has been the head of our Interfaith Clergy Association, and Reverend Charlie Vogely, also, who is the pastor who is at the Lutheran Church. They started Laundry Love, which is something that we collaboratively as an interfaith community buy into, providing laundry once a month at a local laundromat to be able to supply money for laundry for people in our community who need it. We all are supportive of the St. Peter's Food Pantry and Our Lady of Fatima Food Pantry. We do so much together. It is a model of what it means to work collaboratively. Yesterday, I was at the AME Church for their 121st anniversary celebration, where we stood together in joy. And we can only stand together in sorrow when we do stand together in joy. And that is the message that we all have to remember, is continually standing in and standing up. And we have unbelievable allies. They might not do everything right. I don't do everything right. But they are our allies. Dr. Hines, when I got invited to that October 7th, at the Nassau County Police, and they said to ask us to invite our superintendent, and I called him up, and it was a few days before, and he met me there, and the two of us sat together, and I was one of the few clergy people who had their superintendent sitting with them to watch those videos. That's true partnership. And after he saw that, him and Dr. Baer, our principal of Schreiber, they made the decision that we needed to continually have these conversations, to have an open dialogue about what it means to be a leader and what it means to listen to each other. And so what they did was they bought a book by David Brooks, and he hand-delivered it to every one of the clergy's places of worship and invited us to 3 different roundtable discussions about how do we communicate. it does. It takes my breath away. Not that we don't have work to do. We always have work to do. That's the amazing thing to be in partnership, is to say, how can we work together? How can we sit down and say, what's challenging in our community? What's coming up? We're not going to be immune to what goes on in this world. These statistics that Scott gave us, they're a reality. And we have partners to sit in that reality.
Thank you. Dr. Hines, I'm not sure you need to say anything else. This was, yeah. Well, I do want to pick up, and I will echo as well, because when I reached out to Dr. Hines on behalf of our group to invite his participation in this event, it was a matter of minutes before he wrote back and said, I'll be there, which I think is worth highlighting as well. Thank you. Dr. Hines, we have audience members who, of course, are of different ages, have children of different ages at different points in the school district. I would love to just develop this and expound upon what you described before about things that are happening in the district in age-appropriate ways. It sounds like there have been some updates to educational curricula. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the district is thinking about confronting this issue? And I think one of the other things that people would love to hear about is also how we move away from, and this is not a criticism, but move away from the one-off event here and there to address, oh, we're going to have a Holocaust survivor come speak about something, into a more sustained framework for addressing this type of issue in the long term.
Definitely. What I want to try to do, to the best of my ability, is make 3 points with that question. First and foremost, not that there's a silver lining with anything that's happened post-October 7th, but it has forced and sped up the concern that we have as a school district as far as having something that's spiraling curriculum-wise and having it a scope and sequence that, not just in pockets, but it's happening in all the elementary schools at the same time, happening at Weber and certainly at Schreiber. So I would say, well, first of all, we have a website, school district website, and within that website, we have an outline, if you want to check it out, because I think it's something we are, I will say, proud of, but we're continuing to expand it. All the different things that we do within the grade levels. Like this year, we have a few superintendents' conference days, and we're going to have professional development for all of our staff members throughout the year. Last year, we worked with the ADL, and this is a tricky part, too. We invite an organization to work with us. Some people are happy about it. As my grandmother would say, some people not so much happy with, which organization comes in, right? So we have to be very mindful of who our thought partners are moving forward. But I can tell you right now, we're just met with the HMTC, and we're going to have something in 4th and 5th grade, which we're very proud of. Again, it has to be developmentally appropriate in those age levels. And I can tell you there is a practitioner with the HMTC that is...
this is the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center.
Yes, sorry, my apologies. Yes, for those who don't know. Who is an educator, a former elementary educator who knows what she's doing, and she's amazing. So we're going to expand that as well. But I think it's important that sometimes things happen within the school year that you just don't know that it's wrong. And I'll give it, for instance, real quick, because I don't want to eat up too much time. There was something called Artists for Ceasefire last year, and at the Grammy Awards, one of the artists, Billie Eilish, wore an emblem that some people interpreted that it was anti-Semitic, and some people didn't. And of course, our middle school chorus was singing a Billie Eilish song. It was great timing. So the question becomes, what do you do as a school district? Do you pull the song, or do you try to make it a teachable moment where, in as much as some people will not be happy with the outcome, we do the best that we can, and then we try to move forward with everyone knowing, hopefully everybody knows that we try to make the best decision. It was not easy. I can tell you right now, when I first saw the emblem, I didn't really understand it too much. I consulted with some of my rabbis to ask their thoughts, and the more we dug into it, the more we understood. Houston, we have a problem. We need to really figure this out. And so we met somewhere in the middle and we moved forward. And by the way, this is going to continue to happen. We will always come across something that we're not quite sure how to handle it. And my hope is that our wonderful community and school community knows that we lean on people that we trust and we try to make that the best decision moving forward. That was middle school. So there were multiple different edges of lessons learned within that. We could have easily have pulled a song, but what would that have taught? Then you would have parents who are upset, students are upset because they don't understand. So we had to try to help them understand. And you had 8th graders or 7th graders in this terrible position of friends singing, friends not singing. So it's all incredibly complicated and nuanced. And my ask is of our wonderful community and school community, when something like this happens again, and you have been wonderful, you give us the grace of knowing that we're trying to do the best that we can. And to piggyback, if I could for 1 second, on the book talk that we had. Several of our faith leaders attended. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. There is very clear language and laws about not blurring the lines of church and state. I'm here to tell you sometimes you have to. I believe. I could get in trouble. Oh, see, look, someone just got me in trouble for saying that. It's true. Sometimes you have to do things that you don't feel comfortable doing. And the problem is we don't communicate with each other nearly enough. There is a church right on Campus Drive. I didn't know. I mean, I knew it was a church. I passed it a million times. I never knew who worked there. Now I do. Now I put a face to a name, and he has a lot to offer. These are the things that we have to start doing more in our schools. These are the things that we have to start doing more in our community. And hopefully we can be part of that, being a role model in doing so.
Culpin, I'd like to come back to you and talk a little bit about the important work you do in your capacity as co-chair of Erase Racism, in which you support, you work to build allyship among various communities and support advocacy for a world less filled with hate. Could you comment on what you have learned from these efforts and your experiences, and also how we might apply, excuse me, some of those learnings to combating anti-Semitism locally?
Sure. So Erase Racism is a civil rights organization based in Syosset that's more than 20 years old, and it focuses on exposing structural racism in institutions and policies that cause incredible harm to many communities, particularly Black and brown communities. And Erase Racism also advocates for laws and policies to remediate that harm and bring us closer to equity. And there's two, there are many program elements, but there are two that are relevant here. One is a student leadership task force. So Erase Racism has a group of students each year from high schools around Long Island, trains them in leadership and advocacy so they can go back into their communities, work with their schools, community institutions to advocate for change that they want to see. There's also a lot of anti-racist training that racism does, and consultation with school districts to help school leaders create a culture that's more proficient to multiple identities, multiple cultures, more inclusive, and advocates for belonging among all students. I think what we've learned that could be applicable is, one, is having multiple leaders in different positions of influence speak out against anti-Semitism, and being very clear, naming it and being clear that we don't accept it and we don't tolerate it, so that we get those messages into the public domain from various leaders so that it can permeate into multiple environments. Another thing is, I think, melding the quantitative and the qualitative. You mentioned a lot of statistics, and people don't know those statistics, but you also have to meld it with the qualitative, the human impact. There are people behind every single one of those 8,800, and I'm sure there are many, many more not included in the numbers because they're not reported. But I think we have to be sure to tell the full story, the data in a whole, and then also the human impact. And I think the third thing is, all social movements need sustained engagement from people directly affected, from allies, and that's hard to do. And I think there are people that will naturally always show up as allies. That's just in their operating system. And then there are other people that we need, and we need their engagement. And I kind of always think about the social work in clinical term, meeting people where they are. And so I think that work is laborious, it's emotional, and it's hard. But I think given how pervasive anti-Semitism is and has become, we need that full community engagement, and we need it to be sustained. And so, would love to see in this community, race racism's work is across Long Island and New York State, and here we're talking about our community. And, what I imagine is a multi-institution, multi-faith collaboration where we can together imagine a community where all of our kids and residents feel safe to walk around in their identity and feel included and feel like, they matter and they belong.
Thank you. Natalie, I'd love to come back to you and combine a couple of themes about allyship that you spoke of earlier and what Kolpana just was describing. Given your professional work in combating anti-Semitism, could you please share with us things that you might be seeing in other communities that we might be able to make local here? What types of either partnerships are similar to what you're hearing about? What kinds of innovative things have you seen that you feel have a chance at breaking down some of these barriers?
I guess I haven't worked so much in other communities and seen what they've done, but I have spoken to the leaders of the communities who've been working alongside the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. And it's really focusing, as we mentioned before, starting from a younger age and kind of trying to make kids understand different cultures and bringing different cultures together. I think I'm really just gonna drive back to the point of the education point from a younger age. I feel like when people have an education on something at a younger age, it's so much harder to hate something that you actually understand. When you don't understand something, when you don't have a basic knowledge of that thing, it's so easy. It's kind of like not ignorance is bliss, because hating something isn't blissful, but it's the ignorant aspect of not knowing. And I can even talk about it, let's say from my standpoint, from a personal standpoint, growing up and telling people that my mother is Israeli and my father is Iranian, the automatic I would get response my entire upbringing was, oh, what's it like being Jewish and Muslim? It's a basic lack of knowledge, of understanding that Jews have actually been in what was Persia for hundreds of years before the Muslim religion made its way to the region. That's something that most people don't know. And it comes from a lack of education. And I remember growing up and almost feeling annoyed or resentful towards people who didn't know that or didn't understand that. But then as I got older, I understood that I couldn't necessarily be annoyed at them. It was more so kind of the education system failing them. But I think that's something I see in other communities, is that they're focusing on creating programs kind of outside the basic school system for students in the community. And I think that makes a huge impact. I've seen it. I've spoken to some faith leaders that are working in the Bronx. Mostly I've spoken to people in the New York area. But I think that makes a huge impact for kids. I think when they understand other cultures and they gain that knowledge, it changes the entire kind of viewpoint of what they have for other people in the future.
That's great. And if you would pass it back to Dr. Hines, I just want to sort of extrapolate on this point about starting young. I'm an elementary school parent. There are many people in that cohort here as well. Is there anything you could share with us, not the specifics of the programs per se, but how you think about incorporating those types of ideas about how do we inculcate in our youngest community members these notions of tolerance and acceptance, and that differences are something that we can acknowledge and celebrate? How is the district thinking more specifically even about our youngest folks?
Well, one of the things we were grappling with is how young is too young, right? So I think the natural inclination of children, young children, meaning kindergarten, pre-K, first grade, is We love everybody for the most part. We accept people for who they are, their differences. I mean, we see it here with the, the wonderful institution that's here for sure. And by the way, one of the greatest, I would say, assets of Port Washington is its incredible diversity, not only of religion or ethnicity or race, but of thought. And that's really, really important. But developmentally, we're thinking the threshold is 3rd grade, 4th grade, right? When it comes to, as you said, talk about tolerance. And I have to say, quite frankly, the ADL did a really nice job setting this stage for those conversations. Because it's not just about working with our kids, it's about working with the educators who work with the kids. And sometimes that is the greatest challenge, because we don't know where people are in their minds as far as tolerance. And I'm hyper-generalizing when I say this. I think we have, not just here, we have educators who probably don't even know where Israel is on the map, or the history of Israel, and what has been happening, not only recently, but for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, right? They just don't know. And it wasn't until, I'm being honest, I took a real deep dive for me to reassert myself, to understand. When I have parents calling me and saying they're scared, to really try to understand why. But that's me. We need more educators to be educated as far as what's happening there, so in turn, they could teach about tolerance and respecting others and all those different things. So I have to say, we are moving in that direction. Maybe not moving as fast as I would like us to, but I think we're certainly going to get there sooner than later.
Thank you. Rabbi Jody, you, of course, are an educator as well, as a rabbi. Maybe you could comment also to, there are certain things that the district can focus on, as Dr. Hines is articulating. There are things that we could also focus on as a community in homes and, outside of the school. How do you think we can do a better job educating our youth about the dangers of anti-Semitism, of what it is even? And I guess a related question is one of accountability, which is really critical. How can we collectively hold ourselves accountable across all of these big questions? And of course, there's different answers for how we measure in the school district and how we do it in the home and so forth. So there's no scientific answer here, right? But how do you think we can hold ourselves accountable in connection with whatever these educational efforts may be?
So when I think about education, I think about how we need to be responsible for not only holding our own narratives and learning other people's narratives, but also learning our own narratives. And we know that studies have shown that when you educate Jewish students about the dual narrative of the state of Israel, that it helps them to come to conversations with a sense of confidence and a foundational support. So I'm going to start with the fact that we as Jews have the obligation to educate our children in Jewish institutions from a young age. We can't bypass and give that to our secular schools only. We have to. And we know that the community that we live in, we have a million different obligations for our kids. And so what happens a lot of times is that their Jewish education becomes pushed off until later ages and also stops at certain ages. So we need to make the commitment that we are educating our children from the youngest ages to the oldest ages, and that we have to have the support of the whole community behind it. So what does that mean? In the sense of, could I create a curriculum that I think would be wonderful in the secular schools? Yes. But what do we need in most in partnership is we need to understand that our sports needs to accommodate religious experiences, that our theater arts needs to accommodate. And I don't mean accommodate like say, okay, you could miss it and then you miss certain number of meets or whatever it is. It means that we are really working collaboratively to understand that a religious education and understanding our own narrative is the foundational support for our youth to understand who and what they are and what their identity is, because that allows them to be strong advocates and not be defensive. So that's where our responsibility lies. We need to have a shift. And we need to understand that it's our obligation to make different choices. And that is hard, because there are so many opportunities for our kids, but we need to make sure that their opportunity is to develop a sense of self, and to understand that in developing that sense of self, they can learn about others. And then we can build those interfaith experiences that we go from church to synagogue and learn about who they all are and what makes up these communities. But we need to make sure that we find the time. That's the thing we don't have. We don't have an infinite amount of time. So it's up to us to say, how are we going to obligate ourselves to carve it out?
Thank you. Colpana, I want to talk a little bit further about something that we referenced before about the conversations that you and your husband have with your children. What kinds of conversations are going on? Like, how do you actually talk about some of these issues? And I guess the broader question is, how do we as a community help our kids process some of these issues that are going on for a world where discrimination and persecution are way too common?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You know, both my husband and I are the children of immigrants, and we grew up in households where nothing was talked about. And our parents experienced a lot of bias and discrimination, particularly when they came here to the U.S. But it wasn't talked about. And, you know, when we experienced that, we didn't talk about it with them. And for me and for him, you know, we said this stops here with us. We want to run a household where, as I said, we cultivate, you know, a culture of conversation and a culture of curiosity. So with conversation, we initiate conversation. They know that they can initiate conversation, ask us questions. We talk about current events. We talk about the hard stuff, things we've experienced. We talk about what's going on, police brutality. From a very young age, we talked about civil rights, because I think there's a basic humanity embedded in what is a civil right and a basic human right that you can explain as a parent to a kid, and that was very important because of the work that I am involved in, but also for them to be part of this community, part of a broader community, and just, you know, citizens of the earth. And so I think there's that openness, and I don't have all the answers. We definitely don't have all the answers, but I try to read, I listen to podcasts, and I just, you know, make sure that they can ask the questions that are on their mind. And I think to your other question, I think there are probably more parents out there that may not know how to start the conversation or may feel like they have to have all the answers. And so if there's a way as a community to share some basic capacity building for parents, for caregivers, on how to initiate conversations, how to hold space and make sure it's safe for kids to share what's going on at school or what they heard or what they overheard, I think that would be a great asset. And then the last thing I would say is, I think peer-to-peer, you know, facilitated peer-to-peer engagement would be great, whether it's in the school setting or in the community setting. I wouldn't suggest, obviously, re-traumatizing someone who has experienced hate, anti-Semitism, racism, but I think it's really powerful when peers can hear from each other, again, about that human impact. It speaks to your point, Natalie, about just the impact that has, the harm that it does, and I think it's undeniable when you're sitting across the table from someone who is hurting. You know, you learn from that moment, and you really make an emotional connection to that person and to the larger issue.
Thank you. So we are now going to move into the audience Q&A. One thing I'm going to know, because it was referenced before, you may have seen some flyers in the back, or at the entrance, I should say. There is an ADL event on Sunday, November 17th from 12 to 1:15 at the Community Synagogue here in Port Washington, which is geared toward navigating campus anti-Semitism. So please feel free to
And it's one of those things that's sponsored by the Signature Synagogue, so all of the synagogues are involved with it. One of our collaborative efforts.
Great. So
Yeah,
now
so
we will
thank
open it
you,
up.
Scott. So the way this will work is we'll do one question from this side of the room, one question from that side of the room, then we'll head up to the balcony for a question, and we'll just keep repeating that over and over. So I'll start over here. If you have a question or a thought that you'd like to share, please raise your hand. Please wait for the mic, because we do need to have you on the mic in order to be heard and to be also heard on the live stream. Thank you.
Hi. I'd like to touch on a couple of points. One, I'd like to kind of supplement things that were said by Dr. Hines and by Natalie. There are different ages and different things that have been done and can be done to address anti-Semitism. With respect to the school system, I believe that at this juncture, HMTC in the last year has taught 31,000 students and lectured to 31,000 students about the origins and how anti-Semitism has developed historically. And I think that's an important program, and I applaud the efforts in coordinating with HMTC. But I'd like more fundamentally to touch on something that Natalie addressed. And Natalie said it depends on who you ask and how old they are when she went through Washington Square Park. I think that the anti-Semitism that we have on college campuses is something that's concerning to everyone here. I think the heads move up and down, that I'm pretty accurate. And I wanted to mention that recently there was a report to Governor Hochul addressing anti-Semitism at CUNY. I'm not sure who's familiar with it. I'm not sure who is not. In any case, it made certain recommendations. And I wanted to mention that Gina Solitti, who is our assembly person, is going to introduce legislation. She is at the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism, and she's going to introduce legislation that will help define and address anti-Semitism, not just at CUNY, but at all colleges throughout the state. And I think that should be supported, and I think it's a wonderful step.
Hi, thank you all for being here and for your comments. Wanted to comment really more about the school district, but taking the information that you've all shared. And I find that in our district, there's more big seminars and assemblies. And I find, like what Kalpana was saying, that would be beneficial if there were more, the smaller focus groups and individual role playing, and not just about anti-Semitism, but just about being different and engaging and connecting with people. I just find that generally it's lacking, and it's something that I've brought up to the head of counseling and others, that I just find that our district, while I applaud everything that you're doing and the district's doing, that there could be more to engage in smaller groups and make it more effective for the kids at all ages.
Thank you for that comment, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I will say, when we start making sure that it's taking place throughout all of our elementary schools in 4th and 5th grade, they will in fact be smaller, which is a really good first step. I know when the HMTC and other organizations come to Schreiber, they try to have smaller, not grade-wide assemblies. We know it's not as effective as it could be when you have 400 students in one place. So I will say, the administrator who oversees all of this work moving forward, we'll try to do that to the best of our ability. Sometimes because of scheduling, it's very hard to do so. And sometimes we have the ability to make those shifts. But ultimately, in the end, yes, of course, if we have 30 students as opposed to 60 or 90 or 120, it loses the impact. One of the things we've, if I can speak frankly here, struggled with as well is it's not just about Holocaust education. And by the way, New York State provides a wonderful roadmap and guide that all school districts, public school districts, must adhere to. But that's just a starting point. That really is, if anything, that's just the baseline of what we can do. The real power of what we're looking to do is to reach out to other organizations outside of the ones that we always lean on, right, which is right here in the backyard, which HMTC and the ADL, and we've done a really good job doing that too. That's why with professional development for our educators, we have, and it'll be up on our website within a week or two, all the different organizations since last year that we've incorporated. So it's not just smaller sections or smaller classes for kids for us to impact. It really comes down to professionally developing our educators so they feel comfortable and they know what they're doing in the classroom. I'm not a big fan of inoculations. I mean, I am, like for kids, but I'm saying one-shot deals really don't have that much of a lasting impact. That's why we need to make sure that it's systemic and sustainable moving forward.
Is this on? Yeah. Hi. I was struck by the big difference in the statistics between the rise of incidents of anti-Semitism in Suffolk County, where you think someone said it was a 100% increase, but in Nassau County it was only 30% increase. Does anybody have any thoughts as to why there's such a difference? And along those lines, with all the efforts in the community to reduce anti-Semitic incidents, is there any measure on your success?
Well, I can comment at least on the source of the statistics, which came from Newsday. They were published yesterday. Beyond that, I personally don't have enough information to explain why there might be such a delta. Again, I would highlight that what is seen in those numbers those are the reported incidents, and so it would be difficult to track, obviously. Are we under-reporting in Nassau County? Are we over-reporting in Suffolk County? Don't know the answers to those questions. I mean, I think the takeaway that I took from it was that they're going up. There's a big boost in both places, right? In both counties. Dr. Hines, in terms of the accountability or just measuring.
Sure. Well, even before I get to the accountability part, I don't know how true this is, but I will say I work with many superintendents across Long Island, and there's a small cadre of us who meet often. So Syosset is one of them with Tom Rogers. Comac is another. Plainview Old Bethpage. And this is where, from a school district perspective, is where they find themselves struggling with symbols of hate emerging and then other things that take place that are anti-Semitic. In Suffolk County, when I was working in Suffolk County in 2 other school districts, I know it was a while ago, but this was never a conversation with the school districts I was in. I will say now, even when I reach out to some of my colleagues, as far as if they're on the East End or if they're in the middle of Suffolk County, they don't really come across this sort of thing that much. So what I have found is that from a superintendent standpoint, what we have to do is engage more of our superintendents in what to do and when things happen within the community to introduce them to the great resources that we have that they don't have out there, which I just find fascinating. As far as the accountability piece, I don't know how to measure right now, aside from the number of incidents that happen, but I'm going to tell you just something that I found really unsettling that happened last year, and it happened with the middle school student showing a yearbook. Just showing me his yearbook when he moved on from Weber to Schreiber. And within the yearbook, it showed kids that were writing things that I don't even think they thought that were anti-Semitic. Using language, saying things that, saying hey, and then I'm not going to say what the word is. I don't think they knew what they were saying and doing was hurtful. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. So did it come across my desk as something that was anti-Semitic? No, but the parent, after something happened to this in particular child, came and said, look what his peers are doing. And I could guarantee you, he is not the only student. So whether it's incidents that are reported, that Newsday is reporting, or other, wherever these reports are coming from, it has to happen in the home, in partnership with the schools. And that does not happen enough. Part of that is my fault, so from an accountability standpoint, we need to do more, but I'm asking parents to do the same thing and have those hard conversations. And this is going to be very unpopular, but I'm going to say it because I think it needs to be said. Sometimes when these incidents happen, the students who are doing it are Jewish, which is for me, I'm very surprised by that. And then when the parents are, when we share this information with the parents, as you can imagine, they're appalled. They're appalled when this happens. So there is so much deep work that has to take place. There's no one size fits all with any of this, but this is a really good starting point, is at least trying to have these very, very hard conversations. And to acknowledge, that's where the accountability comes in, by the way, to acknowledge when one is falling short. And that's what we're going to try to continue to do moving forward.
Dr. Hines, one follow-up that I would love to pose here is, understood that it's difficult to measure progress, right, in short term, and obviously reported incidents. Part of what I think we need in any environment, so school or otherwise, is an environment that feels safe enough that people can report and can feel comfortable enough to come forward and say that they have been the subject of something that was bothersome, that may have been discriminatory. Could you comment a little bit further on sort of where we go from here as a district with respect to both creating that inclusive, comfortable environment for students to report in terms of what those protocols may be, how they're evaluated, but also what's sort of the plan in the months ahead to educate the faculty? Because you referenced that a moment ago as being an area of some ignorance.
Definitely. So I would say first and foremost, we had, for those of you who are paying attention, which I think is everybody here, last year was not a good year as far as symbols of hate showing up in our school district. There were times when, my goodness, I think I was sending something home, a letter home like once a week. What would happen is the more letters I sent home, the more students, I think, or a student felt inclined to do certain things. And so the protocols that we have in place, we have things that I can't share with you that we're doing. What I can tell you is we have our counselors, we have our teachers, and certainly our administrators working very closely with our students. And I have to say that relationship piece, school is an organic environment, right? It's all built on relationships. It's all built on feeling like you belong to something outside of yourself. One of the things I think is the strength of our school district is our ability to connect with kids and for them to feel comfortable reporting. Yes, we have mechanisms in place for students to do that. Quite frankly, many times parents are the ones who let us know, but we try to let our students know. I don't care if you think it's on the edge, if it is or if you think it may not be. Still tell an adult that you trust if you think that has happened. And I have to say, as the year went on, more and more students reported things that they saw, whether it was inside or outside of the school district, and so did parents. To date, this, oh gosh, is this real wood? To date, that's not, that's metal, oh boy. We haven't had any incidents so far. Is that because of some of the things that we have done toward the end of last year and beginning this year? I'd like to think that's part of it. I'd also like to think that they have seen the impact of their friends and family members being very hurt by what has happened. So we'll continue to sharpen our saw when it comes to the protocols we have in place. I could tell you, every single incident that takes place, the police are involved. That's part of the protocol list that we have. We notify the police, we can determine, or they determine if it's a hate crime, and then whatever they can do, and by the way, we should have built an office last year for our SRO, because they were there all the time, and they will always continue to be there if we need them. I'm very proud of the work that we're doing so far, but we still, like I said, we still have a long way to go.
See, we have a few hands over here.
Thanks for everybody being on the panel. It was great, Natalie. Thanks for sharing your story. Just something that I personally struggle to reconcile with, that I'm looking for input on here. I think obviously the protests that we're seeing around the country over the last year have been kind of the flashpoint for a lot of the rise in anti-Semitism around the country and the world. And when I see these protests, I've experienced them in person, I see them in the media. Sadly, the images I see of the pro-Palestinian protesters are quite diverse. But when I see images of, say, Bring Them Home hostage rally or Stand With Israel rally, they seem to pretty much be Jews. I know you've talked a lot about allies and there's multi-faith participation here and certainly in the community, but it doesn't feel like the broader world sees or feels that, and I feel like that actually breathes into the anti-Semitism. It feels like a everybody against us. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So this is, you know, I was very blessed, and I think in Port Washington we were very blessed that when October 7th happened, our neighbors reached out to us and continued to reach out to us. But that was not the case over the course of all of Long Island. And we actually just got a grant to work interfaith-wise regionally across all of Long Island to try to build dialogue between faith leaders across Long Island, and to be able to deal with doing first a seminar about how to deal with polarization in our communities, and then to create speaker bureaus so that we can be advocates in each other's houses of worship and secular community at large, to be able to speak the truth of what it means to really be an ally. So this is the work that our community sees, just like what you're saying, Bobby, as essential, you know, and trying to really dig into what we already have as a foundation in Port Washington and Manhasset across our larger region. You know, it is harder. They have this foundation already in Westchester. Interesting, we're modeling it after the work that they've been doing there. We're broader, much larger, and many more people. But also what you're saying is thinking about the protests, and especially on these college campuses. Just today, this afternoon, I had 2 meetings, one with a freshman in college and one with a parent who has a freshman and a junior in college. And both spoke to me about academics, faculty who they felt were creating one narrative that was having an impact on the students in those environments, that people who were not knowledgeable, like, saw this as truth. And how do they I think my microphone's almost, oh, okay. How do they approach this in the institutions that they're in without being penalized? And that's oftentimes the worry here. And how do you approach something from a place of curiosity and understanding protocols in the institutions that you're in to be able to advocate for your people? And these conversations are hard, but they're happening. And they're happening more in this past year than ever in my rabbinate, which is both disconcerting, but the fact that these students feel that they can have these conversations and can advocate is something that I feel will help them to build their resilience. So what you are saying is what we've seen, Bobby, that there are certain communities that did not stand up and stand with the Jewish people. And that, like what I said from the beginning is, it's hard to find time, but we have to do the same. So when something happens, joy and sorrow, we have to carve out the time to stand up and stand with as well. Not that it's going to make everything okay, it's not, but it is modeling what we want the ideal to be in our communities.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Hello, I've been in the community. I moved here in 1975. I came from the South Shore where I lived in a mixed community, and there was one area that had two signs, NJA and no dogs allowed. And that was near Fort Tilden. And I was grateful that I could go into the community because my last name was not Jewish. So I was permitted in there. I moved to Port Washington because, first of all, I had remarried and I have children that were Jewish and non-Jewish. And I said, oh my goodness, a community that's a melting pot. Everybody is here, all different races, all different religions. It's wonderful. I was thrilled, I had my children in the Manhaven School. I'm going back a long time in the 70s. And I went there for a school meeting, and I saw a swastika carved into the desk. And I went to the principal at that time, and I sat with him, and I said, oh my God, you know, I came here, I never expected to see that in Port Washington, yet alone here in the Manhaven School. So he said to me, he said, I can reprimand the child, but I can't do anything about the parents because it comes from the parents, obviously. He's correct. It came from the parents. How did the child know to even draw something like that? I'm talking about elementary school. So I left, and I said, what do I do at this point? I'm in a community, and the community that I was in was 2% Jewish at that time in Sands Point. We were not Jewish. But I had non-Jewish children too. So it was great for me. Then I became involved in Port Counseling Center. And I made Port Counseling Center, by the way. It was called Port Alert. I changed the name. I got social workers in there. I'm a professional in town. And I saw a divisiveness with the social workers and the administrator that we had hired there at Port Counseling. I saw the differences until we got somebody who's absolutely fabulous there. Okay, anyway, I want to thank you because what you hit upon was education. And I think it's Natalie who said education, education, education. I moved here. I said, we all have different backgrounds. So why isn't it taught in the schools, the history of all the different backgrounds that we have here? Why aren't we learning about Judaism and where we came from? And no, you don't mix religion and the state and all of that, but as a history lesson, we should know about where we all came from from a very young age. And I think that that's where we're remiss. I felt the difference in 2008 when I had a bridge group of 25 people, all different ethnic religions, everything. All of a sudden, we became divisive. I could keep going, Again, I'm a good talker. It's the education. Education.
Do you bill by the hour?
We're going to move on. Thank you so much for your comments.
I think this will be the final. I know there are other hands up, but there'll be an opportunity for some mingling just to give folks a chance to head out if they'd like to.
My question's generally for everybody. I'm not going to name any names, but when there are politicians making anti-Semitic comments, and do you think it's calling a dog whistle to people that anti-Semitism is patriotism? And how do we deal with teaching kids about anti-Semitism when the highest people in the country are saying the same things publicly and not being reprimanded for it?
Look, I think it's a very important. Sorry, is there someone speaking? No. I don't know if anybody wants to. I'm sorry.
Let's stick with what our moderator was about to say, please.
I was going to say, I think, I think there's a lot of truth to that personally. I also want to be cognizant, and this was something that we gave our word to the Landmark Theater about, that in light of the proximity to the election, that we would try in this dialogue, in this setting, to try to keep it outside of politics and focus on the issue, but we appreciate you raising it, and I think it's an important point about just generally the idea that people in all different walks of life potentially can be impacting our children, and we all know, of course, that access to social media and the sound bites from TikTok that were described before are often unfiltered, and we're all at fault to some degree, right? I mean, if I let my daughter pick up my iPad because I'm just busy doing something else, she's on YouTube in 2 seconds, and I'm saying to myself, what controls do I have on this? And all of a sudden, one clip ends and it goes to the next one. It could be an ad, it could be political, it could be anything. And a lot of this, again, comes back to education and in the home, because at the end of the day, I think we probably all agree, we can't control what our kids are going to see for their entire lives and how it's going to be messaged to them. But part of our responsibility as responsible adults, hopefully, is to say there's a right and wrong, and we can hopefully educate people to be able to determine the difference and then make decisions that we, as parents, hope that they will follow. I do want to, I know we have a few more hands, and for those who want to interact with folks here, I think we'll have an opportunity to mingle a little bit. But I do want to end on a quick summary note, which is to say that, picking up on the theme before, that we in this town do have different backgrounds and we have different stories. But on a note of unity, despite the fact that we have these challenges, it's clear that we have allies in the community, and this is a representation of many other people. I think Rabbi Jody will attest that not only in the clergy members she mentioned, but in other pillars of the community life that you've liaised with, people who care about this issue of anti-Semitism. And at the end of the day, I think that despite what differences we may have in politics, right, we all want this to be a place where our children can get a good education, right? To build lifelong friendships, to develop a worldly understanding of the challenges and opportunities that surround us, to feel that they belong to something bigger than themselves, and to understand that with the privilege of living in this town, in this country, comes certain responsibilities that we're all working toward. I think we all, right, want this to be a place where we build one another up rather than tear each other down, to be a place that isn't defined by who we vote for or where we pray or whom we love or what we do for a living, because we are bigger than that. And I'll just say personally that I know firsthand the power of this community. When somebody catches a bad break, it's their neighbors who lift them back up. And when somebody gets sick, people give their love and concern. And when a good cause needs support, we give it, which I think is simultaneously why it's so disheartening to see how divided we can become and how challenging it can be on an issue as serious and concerning as anti-Semitism. and at the same time, why it's so important for us to dedicate and rededicate our efforts toward these important opportunities to make a difference. And so I think we've touched on some themes and questions here. We don't have all the answers, right? How are we going to combat anti-Semitism? We don't have all the answers, but we're hearing about efforts that are taking place, good faith efforts among different pillars of the community. And I think that with these valuable insights that we've hopefully picked up, my personal thought is that while we may not have the answers and we may not be able to solve all of these things tomorrow, I think the way we're going to try to do it is we're going to try to do it locally, right? We're talking here about community organizations, we're talking about the school district, and we're going to try to do it right here in our town. And if that means neighborhood by neighborhood or block by block or house by house, I think there are opportunities for us to educate, to be educated ourselves, to befriend, to build bridges. And I know that from speaking to a lot of fellow Jews in the community, we are not going to be silent, right? We are not going to go away. We are not going to sit idly by this terrible issue that continues to confront us, because we are not going to stand for it, right? We're going to be vocal, we're going to show up, we're going to demand continued action, and we're going to build bridges with allies both within the Jewish community and outside it. And I think this is what comes down to something that, as you said, Dr. Hines, at the elementary school level, we're talking about let's love everybody, right? And as simplistic as that sounds, I think that that's something that actually speaks a lot of truth, because at the end of the day, some of this is about the golden rule, right? This is the answer to hate is not just love per se, but it's also dedicated action that we can use to sort of build community and stand up for ourselves. And one final comment, because I know there are a number of young people who are watching on the streamed version of this. I just want to say that while you may be different ages and have different understandings of what is going on with respect to October 7th, with what's going on in our school district, there is a universal message that I hope our young people can take away, which is that when people try to tear us apart as a community, we come together. When times are tough, we build community. When the world seems like a scary place, we find safety and comfort in each other. And there may come a time, and maybe it's just right now, when the world asks if there's still hope for the next generation. And in time, through these types of efforts and these dialogues, I hope we can say, let's bring them to Port Washington, right? There may come a time, right, when people wonder, where we can learn how to celebrate diversity and find strength in each other, and I hope that we can say, let's bring them to Port Washington. There may come a time, right, when communities long for connection and understanding, and we can bring them here to Port Washington. I think that's our task. How do we create this safe space to grow together, to build together, and to make the better future that we all want to give to the next generation? So we have work to do, but tonight hopefully deepens our resolve. And I want to say a special thank you to all of our panelists and our keynote speakers.
Thank you all again for being here. Have a wonderful evening.